can see we're doing like 9 billion damage, which, you know, I've seen worse. It's very satisfying to wipe a big group like that because of the shadow imbuement explosions. That was really fun. Hello everyone, welcome. As you saw in the pre-roll footage, we are playing a Shadowslicer build. We are dashing here, we are dashing there, we are slicing our enemies up, they are exploding, we are having a really good time. I had the idea for this build in the preseason, and I wanted to play it. It works a little bit differently than I crafted it before the season came out. I originally thought that with the new unique boots and shadow imbuement that perhaps if we were dealing shadow damage over time with the aspect that shadow imbue damages them over time, that perhaps this could increase shadow imbue's single target damage. I don't believe that is very viable from the minimal amount of testing that I did with this, but we do get to combine the fun part of Season 7, in my opinion. What I'm having the most fun with is this Witch Power Grow, where after casting an ultimate, your minions, servants, companions, those sorts of things all grow big, and then do big damage, gaining 100% crit chance for 10 seconds. And the way that I would describe this build is that it works very similarly to the way that Dance of Knives works, where you have a mobility skill, and you combine that mobility skill with Shadow Clone, and together the two of them do a decent amount of damage. I do not know what Dance of Knives is getting up to in the pit. From what I understand, is that you cap out. You can't really push with Dance of Knives, and that is similar here. You are definitely capping yourself probably around pit tier 98-ish. You might be able to push 100 if you have like a giga good gear, amazing amulet, and then you just have the combo for this build down really well. I think it's a little bit too clunky for me, and I honestly get a little dizzy if I play this build for too long with how much you're dashing around. So keep that in mind, that it is not a pit pushing build, but it is certainly a let's have a lot of fun build. So what I'm going to do to try and keep this build a little bit shorter is let's first talk about a couple of breakpoints on the build that you need to play it. We'll talk about the gear, the skill tree, the Paragon board, and so forth. So first things first, because we're using Grow, we need to cast our ultimate every 10 seconds, and for that you need your Shadow Clone cooldown to be around 15 seconds. Now I say 15 seconds because we are a rogue, and we are running preparation, and we are running a way to spend 75 energy every about 8 seconds, and so that will decrease the ultimate skill by 5 seconds, which is why the 15-second cooldown is our first breakpoint. Our next breakpoint is somewhere in the 2.5 to 2.25 second range on dash. You can see mine is actually, in my opinion, a little kind of high, and that's purely for single target scenarios, where in single target scenarios you may find yourself running out of dash charges. You'll never have an issue in AoE because you're going to be using your smoke grenade to reduce this thing's cooldown, but I think to play very smoothly you want around 2.25 to 2.5 seconds max on your charge cooldown. So that's breakpoint number 2. Next thing is our cold imbue. I think you need at least 4. You might be able to get away with 3, and then you're just not doing as much damage, but you definitely want 4 to 5 charges for cold imbue. And that has to be done here on the pants because we're running unique gloves and boots. So you have to do those on your pants. So while you are working at getting those breakpoints, and while you are kind of building up your gear for this end game, let's have some fun Shadowslicer build, I would recommend playing Dance of Knives. I think that's a build that you can play kind of in tier 3, starting in tier 4, and then once you have the gear, if you really want to play the Shadowslicer build, then I would switch once I have, say, like a pair of GA Assassin Stride. I'd look to make sure that you have a Harley Quinn's Crest that's masterworked into cooldown a little bit. Otherwise, also having Shadow Clone cooldown reduction on your jewelry here is another, as you can see, my gear is fully masterworked, right? And I'm at 10 seconds. So to be at 5, you still do need decent rolls. And obviously the Shadow Clone cooldown reduction on the ring here was masterworked twice, right? So there is a bit of investment to get into this build. I would also say that to get the most damage out of this, you need to be doing double damage 100% of the time, both with dash, which we put on our weapon, as well as with Shadow Clone that we have here on our swords. So there is a decent amount of Obdicite that you will need to farm up. However, what I will say about that is that Dance of Knives is a wonderful build to play in the Nightmare Dungeons, and Nightmare Dungeons are kind of an underrated way to get Obdicite with how fast you move as a rogue. You can move through those, fully clearing those Nightmare Dungeons rather quickly, and get actually a ton of Obdicite. So I was running a bunch, and I currently have 37,000 Obdicite. At one point, it was before I fully masterworked this build, I was at 70, 80,000 Obdicite just from running maybe 5 hours worth of Nightmare Dungeons over a couple of days. So it's actually, I would say this build and Dance of Knives are really good builds to do that on. So once you have enough Obdicite, you can start masterworking to get your, double hits on the dealing double damage on your weapons. I talked about having the cooldown reduction on Shaco. Shroud of False Death is the best chest plate for rogues because so much of our damage comes from passives, and so getting +1 to all of the different passives just gives us an enormous amount of damage on a chest piece. We are running Grasp of Shadow. I will let somebody more smarter than me let me know if they actually think that these gloves are working, because I don't know if I just can't see the third Shadow Clone, but theoretically you should have 3 Shadow Clones when you dash, right? You should get the one 45% of the time, or 50 if you have it max rolled, from Grasp of Shadows. You should have the one from casting your ultimate, and then you should have the one from Shadowslicer. So you should be seeing 3 different Shadow Clones. I'm only ever really seeing 2, and maybe it's because the Grasp of Shadows and the Shadowslicer clone are just literally on top of each other, so you can only see one of them. But it could just be that one of these isn't working properly. But either way, you still do a ton of damage. And I really like the +7 to cutthroat skills, and you get ultimate damage on a glove, and you get crit chance, which is very nice. So really good stats on this, and it's just fun to use a less popular unique. We talked about Cold Imbue on the legs. Assassin's Stride, I think the most important one is your mobility cooldown reduction. Ideally, you'd probably want 1 masterwork into the G8 mobility cooldown reduction, and then 2 into the mobility skills. I don't believe that the effect on these boots are very important for this build, so keep that in mind that you don't really need a super max rolled one. For the bow, we talked about having chance for dash to deal double damage there. And one thing that's a little bit different between this Shadowslicer build and Dance of Knives is that in Dance of Knives you're doing about 60% of your damage just from the Dance of Knives and then 40% from your Shadow Clone. That is actually swapped. I think you're 60 to 70% damage from your Shadow Clone in this build, and then 30 to 40% from your own casts of dash. And so because of that, we're running on our two-handed weapon here, Apogenic Furor, to get the most out of our Shadow Clone damage. Other things that I cannot confirm works, but ideally, because it's an ultimate, your Shadow Clones hopefully have the ultimate tag on it, and so the Shadow Clone from Grasp of Shadow and the Shadow Clone from Shadowslicer hopefully are affected by this. I don't do testing. I don't know if it works. I just theorycraft, I build, I test. If it's fun, I make a video. That's what we're doing here, right? So somebody smarter than me can test it if they want, but that's the thought process behind putting this on the bow. We talked on our weapons about getting chance for Shadow Clone to deal double damage. We are running Shadowslicer on one of them, and then Vehement Brawlers for the increased damage after casting an ultimate. Because I'm doing that about every 6 to 7 seconds, so it works out very well for Vehement Brawlers. Let's talk about we'll talk about the amulet last. Let's talk about the rings. I have Imitated Imbuement. Shadow Clones also mimic the imbuements applied to your skills. What I do not know is that if they mimic the imbuement that is passively done through Assassin's Stride, but regardless, you are hopefully always going to be cold imbued, and so you'll get the cold imbue damage bonus, which we'll talk about when we get to the skill tree, when your shadow clones deal damage, and casting an imbuement skill grants your active shadow clones. Thank you, Variana. Thank you. Increases your active shadow clones by 20%. I don't know how important that is. This might be one that somebody who's smarter than me in tests says, actually, you don't need this. But I think because we do deal so much non-physical damage, we rely on non-physical damage bonuses, that we want our shadow clones to be doing non-physical damage, and so we need our shadow clone to be imbued. So that's why I run this. Synergy. This is kind of where the rotation of the build comes in. This and one of our legendary Paragon nodes. Is after using an agility skill, it reduces the cooldown of your next subterfuge skill. After using a subterfuge skill, it increases the next damage of your agility skill. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be alternating between throwing your smoke grenade and dashing, and throwing your smoke grenade and casting your ultimate, and throwing your smoke grenade and dashing, and casting Dark Shroud and dashing, and going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and doing, you know, it's kind of funny in the dash build because you're like ping-ponging abilities, and then you're ping-ponging across the screen too, you know, dashing back and forth. So this actually works out really nice, but that's a pretty big multiplier to just have on your ring, 53%. When you think about it, that's a bigger multiplier than what you get even on Starless Skies. So kind of a cool part about this build. Same for what we have here on our amulet. We'll first talk about the aspect on it. We're running Stolen Vigor. We run the Momentum Key passive, and so while we're at mask stacks, our Cutthroat skills deal 75 increased damage. One thing to note is that your Shadow Clone becomes a Cutthroat skill on cast, so then once it does damage, it should theoretically get the bonus from Stolen Vigor, so we put this here. The other thing that's very important for dealing an optimal amount of damage on this build is to have ranks to impetus. As you can see, I was lucky enough to buy this G-Aid ranks to impetus that I was able to roll dexterity % on, and impetus is going to be our #1 passive for this build, and this actually transitions us very well into the skill tree. Because we can start at the bottom and just immediately talk about impetus. So after moving 15 meters, your next core or ultimate skill deals 80% increased damage. That's amazing. It increases our shadow clone damage when we cast it. Traveling 15 meters is very, very simple in this build. And then the second part of this is while this damage bonus is ready, so in between while we're waiting to cast our ultimate again, our agility, which is our dash, skills deal 50% increased damage, multiplicative. So two amazing bonuses that work perfectly for our build in one passive, and so that's why it's very, very important, I think, to have ranks to impetus on your amulet. I mentioned we use momentum. Obviously, we are fully into Shadow Clone, 1 into Aftermath, so that we can take 3 out of 3 into Unto Dawn. We are taking Cold Immunity, but only 1 rank. Putting more here does not increase our damage. And we go to Mixed, so that we can do 20 to 40% multiplicative damage when enemies are frozen and or bosses are staggered. We take Frigid Finesse, which if you're looking for the second highest multiplier for this build, it's probably Frigid Finesse. Just for the fact that we are going to always have enemies frozen from our Cold Imbue, and so we can do a 40% multiplicative at 4 out of 3. Gets even better. I do invest fully into Shadow Imbuement, and then actually can go back to Mixed. We take Mixed Shadow Imbuement to gain additional 12% increased non-physical damage to enemies that are infected by our Shadow Imbuement. I was messing around with a way to not run one of the Witch Powers and trying to use this as our vulnerable application, but it actually felt really bad, so I don't recommend doing that. I'd recommend Mixed. I take 1 Dark Shroud into Enhanced just for the movement speed. It is 100% not necessary, but as we kind of go up here, you'll find that there are a lot of passives and nodes that just don't help us very much. If we go back and look at our like our Grasp of Shadow isn't a lucky hit. The lucky hit on our boots aren't very important. There aren't a lot of lucky hits in our build that like allow us to do anything important, and so adding lucky hit chance isn't really important, so it doesn't make sense to take the fortune here. We're not doing damage with our traps. We don't need to manage our energy at all. We don't really need attack speed from from alchemical advantage. We're always going to be close, so dealing damage to distance enemies doesn't help us. We don't need the additional crit chance, so precision imbuement doesn't make sense. We don't need the defenses up here. And so you'll see we're really starting to, lose out on places to put points as we go through this. So I max out Smoke Grenade for the cooldown reduction and come up to countering so that when it hits an elite, it is basically always refreshed. Fully into dash, and we're taking discipline dash. You saw as the preview gameplay that when you dash, you kind of want to back up a bit before you dash again. And it also works really well with Ballistra because you can evade immediately after dashing to gain your bonus here and get you some extra distance from the enemies, so that when you cast dash again, you're surrounding enemies again and you deal the big discipline dash explosion around them. We take Caltrops up into Methodical for increased chilling, and then obviously we really want this enhanced so that bosses and things with a lot of health will eventually take an extra amount of damage from us. We do take this trifecta plus Ballistra here of offensive passive, so unstable elixirs, drinking health potions will give us more damage. Trick attacks is pretty good because we are going to be dazing enemies a lot with our smoke grenades. So we're pretty much going to have permanent uptime on trick attacks, and this will increase our crit chance and our crit damage by a lot. And then weapon mastery, we're using bows and swords, so we just get increased vulnerable damage and increased general damage. So that's kind of nice. What else do we have? To get down to all the meaty stuff, we have to take 1 into sturdy, or 2 into sturdy, and then 1 or 3 into siphoning strikes. This build is incredibly tanky because of siphoning strikes. You just have so much healing in this build that it's really hard to die. It's actually really nice. And then we just take 2 into any basic skill to get us going. So that's the skill tree. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the Paragon board. You'll notice that this Paragon board is basically identical to Maxroll's Paragon board for the Dance of Knives build because they do work so similar together. The only main difference is on our Dance Macabre board, we do come up and take all of these nodes because we really like the mobility cooldown reduction, right? And then Max Life is also kind of nice. I did mention that there was one legendary node here on our Paragon board that's really important, and that's our Dance Macabre. Casting a mobility or a subterfuge skill increases the damage of your next skill by 75%. It's a huge multiplier, and basically what you always want to have in mind when you're playing this build is that you never want to cast either dash or your ultimate after cold imbuing, or tossing your caltrops. And the reason for that is because it will lose the bonus, the 75% multiplier bonus from Dance Macabre, because those are neither actually this is subterfuge? No. Yeah, it's an agility. So it's not a mobility one. So you don't want to use either cold imbue or caltrops and then cast your ultimate. So basic combo is this, smoke grenade, alt, smoke grenade, dash, smoke grenade, dash, smoke grenade, dash, smoke grenade, dash. And then you can cold imbue, smoke grenade, alt, smoke grenade, dash, and then you can weave in Dark Shroud instead of casting smoke grenade once or twice to just maintain the shroud stacks on you, which isn't really hard. And if you're going to be casting Dark Shroud after casting dash, you get a huge, 50%, so it's 5 seconds cooldown on Dark Shroud, so you get really high uptime on your Dark Shroud too. So that's really all I wanted to talk about for the Paragon board. I would say if you're looking for a glyph to max first, I guess I've chosen Devious because it grants bonus to the magic nodes, and there's a lot of magic nodes here for ultimate damage, which is a good will help increase the damage that all of our shadow clones do. So that's kind of what I would say. So that is the Paragon board. That is how this build works. I talked about the breakpoints, talked about the skills. Hopefully it helps you better understand how this build works and how you can play it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to transition into the showcasing portion of the build. And for that, we are going to go over to Karagar, and we're going to run a pit tier 90. So I've had a lot of fun with this build this season. I hope you are able to have a lot of fun with this build this season. Um, I don't I imagine if there is someone who's just generically better at testing this stuff than me, that nice, they did fix that part. That they'll be able to potentially get this faster. Oh, the one thing I'll note is that with how I have this set up, my resistances are a little bit low on lightning and poison, so I do run Storm of the Wilds whenever I do anything to get above 70%. And then I like to run the precision. And since we're going in the pit, I'll always just take a red main because why not? And then I'll take some extra dex because again, why not? Might as well take as much as we can. So, alright, let's head into pit tier 90 and hopefully have some fun. Now, I will say this is the first time I'm playing this after the new patch, so if we get in here and it's awful, then you will learn with me how this works. Oh, and actually, as I see my Piranado, I'm noticing that I did not talk about my witch powers, which is a little bit of a problem. Because some of them are very important. So that's a little disappointing on my end. Sorry about that. But essentially, you're running Piranha Nado, a Hex. You can see my Decay aura there. Yeah. And obviously Grow is really important for the build because it allows your Shadow Clones to do extra damage. Sorry. I have to think way too much when I play this build because, you know, I'm like theoretically supposed to be alternating between a bunch of the... You can see we're doing like 9 billion damage, which, you know, I've seen worse. It's very satisfying to wipe a big group like that because of the shadow imbuement explosions. That was really fun. And yeah, that's why I like playing the build. Obviously fun builds are fun, and we should play fun builds. And if you like the idea of like just dashing around and dealing a whole bunch of damage while dashing back and forth, then I think you'll definitely enjoy playing this build. As you can see, I moved through this part of the pit rather quickly. What I don't know is how good we're gonna do versus the boss when we get there, because sometimes I think it's kind of boss dependent. Not always, obviously, but... Holy... Sorry. The other thing that's really annoying with this build is if you play like me and you hold... as you see, I'm having a giant lag spike, so that's really fun. Sorry about that. If you are someone who holds left click to move, like me, is that oftentimes if you're holding left click to move and you cast dash, it'll like take you back. It'll try to take you back to where you were when you first cast dash, and then spin you around in circles. I've noticed that it also happens a lot on our on like barbarian builds, like whirlwind builds, because you're like casting a skill and using the hold to play. Yeah. Or the hold to move. I don't know. I don't think a lot of people actually do hold the mouse button to move. I think that's more of a me problem. But yeah. That's how she plays, boys. And we're through. I was actually kind of slow. I can normally do a tier 90 a lot faster than that, but obviously I had the kind of lag spike there. As you can see, I ran a dash there. I think that was really bad, actually. I think I casted my ult there. I think I casted my ult there after casting Caltros. Yeah, it's not bad. That's a pit tier 90. I mean, I think that's pretty good. I think I cleared through that pretty quickly, and obviously I don't do the rotation properly, and as you can see, my brain is really, really slow, and I like can't think when I'm trying to do the rotation right. So it is kind of involved, which I know a lot of rogue players like, because it's not just spamming one button over and over and over again. It does take I don't know, a decent amount of thought process to get through and do all of that. So, but yeah, so in an effort to keep this video... Oh yeah, before we go, first let's see if I can upgrade my Devious a bunch. Upgrade failed, that's unfortunate. Got to 83. Let's talk about the witch powers. So as you saw, we use Piranha NATO, and then to activate it, we run Aura of Siphoning, and I just have Hex of Whispers for the extra Fortify to make it even extra tankier. Shaken Soul is necessary for vulnerable, unfortunately. We talked about how Grow is really important, and then Purging Touch is actually really important because I didn't talk about this when we talked about the gear either, but we are running the Ruin, where your ultimate skills are also treated as Growth and Decay / Eldritch / Psyche, and they deal 10% additional damage, and so we want to get to the bonus from Purging Touch onto our ultimate, because that does a lot of damage. So anyway, that's how I'll wrap it up. Hopefully we are close to... We should be under 30 minutes still. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a watch for you, but yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next build. See ya!